Hello, everyone. You are very welcome to Fun Fridays. My name is Amy, for those of you who haven't met me before, and I hope you had a brilliant midterm and welcome back to school. The first week back, I hope it went really, really well. So just having a little bit of a look through all of our participants, lots of people joining, lots of people catching up. I have a few shout outs to give. So I want to say hello to Kilmore National School. I hope you guys are here. I also want to say hello to second, third, and fourth class in Carnan National School. Hi, everybody. I also want to give a shout out to first class in Castleknock National School. I know you guys have been here every week, so well done. Oh, hello to junior and senior infants and first class in Carnan National School. Lots of people in from Carnan National School. That's brilliant. Now, so today's topic is going to be all about the environment. And the environment has been very, very topical over the last number of years. It's coming into our conversations a lot more. So today we're going to talk a little bit about climate change. We're also going to talk a little bit about water pollution, and we're also going to talk about biodiversity. And I'm going to talk about these all in relation to food production and how we rely on lots of different things in order to be able to produce food, and how it might be becoming more challenging to be able to produce food in a changing world. Just one or two more shout outs. Hello to Mrs. Sheehan's room in Carriganima. Hello, everybody. So I just want to wait another minute because I can still see there's lots of people hopping on. I know it starts at 11 o'clock, but I think people just need a little second just to catch themselves up. Hello to Ballybrown National School in County Limerick. Hello, everyone. You're very welcome. Super. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So as usual, I'll start off with a little presentation. There's going to be an educational video, and of course, there will be our craft. And then at the very end, we will have our quiz challenger number 5. So it's our 5th quiz challenger question. And this quiz challenger question, you can use all of the answers that you've collected so far to enter the competition that will open on the 10th of December. So when I ask the quiz challenger question at the end, all you need to do is just remember the question, that it's number 5, and remember the answer. And then I'll be able to send your teacher out a form on the 10th of December so that they can submit your entry into the competition. Lovely. So let's get started. Now, here we go. So we're going to be talking all about the environment today. And like I said at the beginning, it's going to be in relation to food production and farming. So our outline for today, we'll just take a look at that so everyone knows what's going to happen. So an introduction to the environment, where I'm going to cover climate change, water pollution, and then also a bit on biodiversity and soils. I've got a video on the story of Irish wildlife. We are going to be making bird cakes. So these are going to be little cakes that we can make to feed the birds. Either you can work along with me and with the video, or you can do it at a later date. Either is absolutely fine. And then our quiz challenger question. So before we get started, I just want to introduce this whole idea and to make sure that everybody understands what the main purpose of a farm is. So you can use the Q&A box. So teachers, I'll need your help. And to see if anybody has an answer, what is the main purpose of a farm? So why do farms exist? Anybody, any ideas? Why do farms exist? Lots of people saying exactly what I wanted. Very good. Super. Brilliant. People giving examples of things like dairy, wool, dairy and meat. Brilliant. Super. So yes, these are all absolutely correct. To keep animals, to grow corn, all correct. To keep chickens, make hay. Super. So these are all correct answers, but I do just want to highlight that the main purpose of a farm and the reason why farms exist, the reason why they were created in a sense, is to produce food. I'm sure we all know that, and that is exactly what I was getting from saying dairy or beef or corn production. First and foremost, farms exist to produce food. So far, I've covered fruit and vegetables. So we've gone through fruit and vegetables. We know a little bit more about them. And we've gone through cereals and a few other examples of livestock production. I will be covering poultry and eggs and also beef at a later date. But the main purpose of a farm is to produce food. And this is becoming a little bit more difficult because of things like climate change, water pollution, and loss of biodiversity. So biodiversity is all living things. So we need to be really mindful of these changes and all do our best to make changes so that we can continue to produce food and we can continue ourselves to be healthy. So farms exist to produce food, but they are being challenged by all sorts of things. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is climate change. So climate change is essentially an overproduction of something called greenhouse gases. And there's a few examples of greenhouse gases that I'm going to give. But greenhouse gases, what they do, if I just get my little laser. So humans and their actions are responsible for an overproduction of greenhouse gases. So humans produce greenhouse gases on the earth by burning fossil fuels or by different farming practices. They can produce greenhouse gases. Anything, any action that a human performs will essentially create extra greenhouse gases. And they travel up and they trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere. And this causes the Earth to slowly but significantly raise its temperature. And that makes things a lot more unpredictable. So this means where areas where we didn't have very heavy rain before, we might end up with flooding, or areas where it was relatively mild in climate before, you can have very extremes in temperature. So back in 2018 in Ireland, it was a very, very hot summer and the temperatures were reaching over 30 degrees Celsius, which is very unusual for Ireland. And it caused all sorts of problems for people living in apartment buildings or older people who weren't able to regulate their temperature, young children not able to regulate their temperature, and also a lot of droughts for farmers who were growing crops and grasses. So climate change can really impact our ability to produce food and also our health. So it's so important that we work out ways to tackle climate change. I'm going to go through a few examples of where our greenhouse gases are coming from. So they're coming from all of our human actions. The first ones I'm going to detail are going to be the burning of fossil fuels. So if we look over here, we can see all of this smoke ending up in the atmosphere. When we burn fossil fuels, an example of this being coal. So if you think of your fire at home, if you have a fire at home, you're very likely adding fuel to that fire so that it burns and it can create heat. So this is the generation of energy. And we do this for lots and lots of things all over the world. So we burn fossil fuels so that we can generate heat and keep ourselves warm. We also burn fossil fuels when we are running our cars on petrol or diesel. That's also burning fossil fuels. So there's all of these ways that we're actually generating fossil fuels, adding them to our atmosphere, and this is contributing to climate change. So what scientists are trying to do and what governments are trying to do is ban the production of or ban the burning of fossil fuels. And if we can ban the burning of fossil fuels, we will reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we're adding to our atmosphere. So some people might have heard of electric cars before. So that's one example of something that governments are really trying to encourage, that people use electric cars. And that means that cars will no longer run on petrol and diesel. You won't have to go to the petrol station with your parents, but you might have to charge your car up from an electrical point. And that electricity is going to come from sources such as the sun or from the wind, or in some cases, you can even produce energy and electricity from wave power as well. So there's all these ways that we're trying to work on reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that we are adding to the atmosphere. So a lot of these fossil fuels, when we're burning them, they're producing a lot of carbon dioxide. So that's an example of a greenhouse gas that you might have heard of. And carbon dioxide, as well as other greenhouse gases, they contribute to climate change, and this can be a real problem for us. So another one that I want to mention that might be familiar to some of you, maybe it's brand new to others, but we can learn about it today. So when it comes to cows, you might have heard the phrase that cow burps contribute to climate change. So cows, when they eat grass and other material, other food stuff, in their stomachs, that ferments. And there's these tiny little bacteria that help them to break down that digestible food. So when that bacteria is helping them to break it down, they then create a lot of gas that builds up in their tummy that they burp out. And this gas is called methane. So that is another example of a greenhouse gas that can contribute to climate change. So when we have cows that are burping out this gas, they have to burp out the gas, they have to get rid of it some way, then it can end up in the atmosphere and contribute to climate change. So scientists, again, are working on ways that we can reduce the amount of gas that cows are producing so that we can reduce the greenhouse gases and hopefully combat climate change and make sure that climate change isn't an issue for us going forward. We really need to work on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and making the climate a stable place so we can continue to produce food. Because if we keep having these extremes where there's really heavy rain or there's a period of drought, it makes it very hard to produce food. And not only in Ireland, but all across the world, it can be very challenging. So another significant thing that we need to consider when we're producing food, and of course trying to keep ourselves healthy, is water pollution. So we need clean water to be able to produce food, and we also need clean water to drink. Very important. So we have to make sure that water is not polluted. So you might have heard of plastic pollution in the oceans, or you might have heard of oil spills in the oceans. But in our inland water bodies, so our rivers or our lakes or our ponds, we also have to consider the likelihood of pollution. So pollution can happen from wastewater treatment facilities where there's leaking, or it can happen from chemicals entering our waterways. It's very important that we ensure that this doesn't happen. So everyone has a responsibility to make sure that water doesn't get polluted. And there's a few steps that farmers can take to try and make sure that this doesn't happen. And they already do a lot of this when they are spreading slurry. So when we have cows on a farm, they produce poo when they're indoor in the winter, and that slurry can be spread on the land. But we have to make sure that we spread it when there's no heavy rain, and you have to make sure that you spread it far away from a water body. So if they spread it really close to the water, it can end up running off into our river here. But if they spread it further away, we can make sure that it doesn't enter the water. And another simple thing that farmers do is they can put up fences. So if they put up a fence in front of their water body, this will actually stop the cows from coming into the water to have a drink, of course. But if they come down to have a drink, it's very likely that they might poop in the water, and that can also cause some water pollution. So if they put up a fence, that can just prevent that from happening as well. Now, soils. Soils are a very important one to talk about as well. So it is so important that if we want to produce food, that we protect our soils. So the soils, they're a living thing. So that might be familiar to some of you. They're not just they're not a dead thing, and they're not just dirt on the ground. The soils are what allow us to be able to grow crops and what allow us to be able to grow grass that can feed animals. And then all of these sources, of course, feed us. So soils are so important. And one little creature that I want to highlight is the earthworm. So we just have this little quote here that says, Charles Darwin said that long before the plow was introduced, it was the earthworm that plowed the land. So with a plow, when it moves along, it's churning up the top layer of the soil. And this is creating space for roots to put down, or for plants to put down their roots so that they can grow healthy and strong. But if we take a look at what the earthworm does, you can see their movement there. So they would have done the original job of the plow. So when earthworms, they burrow into the soil, they create space in the soil. And this allows when crops are planted into the ground, that their roots can travel in, and it creates a lot of space for them. So the earthworm is a very, very important part of our soil ecosystem. So there's earthworms, there's also lots of different types of bacteria, and that biodiversity, all those living things in the soil, are so important for us to be able to produce food. So we really must protect our soils. Now, the last one that I want to talk about before we go on to our educational video is the hedgerow. So with hedgerows, in this image in front of us here, we don't have a hedgerow, we have a fence. But within Ireland, what we're quite good at doing is using hedgerows instead of fences. And this is absolutely crucial because you can see there's a fence there. There's not many hiding places for animals there. But if we were to put up a hedgerow, it creates lots of hiding space for our wild biodiversity. And as well as that, lots of hedgerow species actually produce fruit, which are a very important food source for our wild birds and mammals. So of course, I've got an example of blackberries here, and I know we also as humans like to pick blackberries. So there's blackberries and there's haws. So a tree called a hawthorn produces these haw berries, and they are very, very important for our wild biodiversity. They're able to give them food during the winter. So if you think about blackberries, they're often produced in the autumn months when maybe insects are not as available. So if you had birds who like to hunt worms and different things, the worms might be not available at the moment. They might not be able to find them. So they then will move on to things like blackberries and haws. So hedgerows are really, really important. Now, I'm going to need another little help from teachers at this point. So to reinforce that point, it's very important that Irish farmers and farmers all over the world make space for wildlife on their farms. So most of the wilder areas that we have in Ireland are contained within farmland. So farmers can maintain hedgerows, they can grow hedgerows, they can foster biodiversity. So farmers, they can be real stewards of the land and they can protect biodiversity. So can you name some examples of wild animals that you might find on Irish farms? That is the question there, and you can use the Q&A box to give me some examples. So I'm looking for examples of Irish wildlife that you might find on Irish farms. Brilliant. Foxes, absolutely. Oh, hedgehogs, brilliant. Badgers, excellent. Oh, somebody said frogs. Yes, very good. Frogs are a great one. So people will usually assume that frogs spend all of their time in ponds, but actually it's usually when they're laying their eggs that they'll be in ponds, but the rest of the time they hang out in damp grass. So of course, in Ireland, there's a lot of rain, so usually our grass is quite damp. So frogs absolutely love to hang out on farmland. Wasps, yeah, absolutely. You find wasps on farmland. Rabbits, rats, yes, yeah, rats, absolutely. They hang out on farmland for sure. Deer as well. Oh, somebody said kestrels. Yes, absolutely. A kestrel is an example of a bird of prey. So they are birds that have those long talons and a very sharp beak. Swallows, super. Swallows are an example of a migratory bird. So they spend their winters in Africa and they come over to Ireland and other European countries to breed in the summertime. Bees, absolutely. Hares. No wrong answers at all. Very well done, everyone. Pheasants, brilliant. So they are all examples of Irish wildlife. So the examples that I just took, you guys were very adventurous. I saw someone say a pine marten. I'm delighted that you've heard of a pine marten. So I've got a red fox, a European robin, and a European blackbird. So these are all animals that you would frequently find on Irish farms. So with the foxes, they'll live in their dens and they can build them in drains and ditches. And there's also the robin as well. So robins, they will feed on lots of insects, but also they do like to feed on fruits and seeds and different things that they can find in the wintertime when insects and smaller little invertebrates are more difficult to find. And that's the same thing with blackbirds as well. So we have our red fox, which is one of our carnivores. So the red fox and the Eurasian badger, so the badger and the fox, they're our two largest carnivores that we have here in Ireland. So they, if they were desperate, they might eat some fruit and some seeds, but they will mostly go for just meat. So probably rabbits, or they might take a blackbird if they could catch it. And then with our robin and our blackbird, they are omnivores because they'll eat insects, which is their meat, and then they will also eat any fruit or nuts and seeds that they can find. Oh, I'm just gonna say that now that somebody had mentioned it. So mink, yes, you will find mink on Irish farms. I think I might have addressed this at some point before in our webinars, but mink. So you can find them on Irish farms, but they are a non-native species. So that means that they shouldn't actually be in Ireland. So mink, the ones that we have in Ireland, actually come from America. And we shouldn't have them on our island of Ireland because they don't naturally occur here. And they can cause a lot of problems for farmers, and they can also cause a lot of problems for wildlife. So they're a very interesting one. Now, we are going to move on to our educational video. So this is going to be the story of Irish wildlife. And let's just press play here.
This is the story of Irish wildlife. Across the Irish countryside, you can see a mosaic of fields, roads, and houses. But Ireland didn't always look like this. The landscape was once covered in dense forest that provided habitat and hiding places for many animals. The brown bear once lived in Ireland, but it was hunted to extinction 20,000 years ago. The grey wolf is a more recent extinction. They roamed the Irish landscape until 1786. In present-day Ireland, we don't have any large predators. This means the largest wild animals we have are deer, and there are far too many of them. Most of Ireland's available wildlife habitat is contained within farmland. This means that farmers have a role to play in providing and maintaining wildlife habitat. Hedgerows are very important for both wild plants and animals. Plants such as bramble grow in hedgerows, and they produce fruit called blackberries. They are very important food sources for birds and mammals. Birds hide from predators and heavy rain in hedgerows. Hedgehogs spend time in hedgerows where they hunt for tasty creatures such as slugs. Many small creatures live in leaf litter at the bottom of hedges. This is a woodlouse. They feed on dead creatures and plant material. Wildflowers are also very important for wildlife. If farmers allowed wildflowers to grow, they provide nectar for our famous pollinators such as butterflies and bees. Did you know even bats can find a place to live in the countryside? They often use buildings and farm sheds to roost. Providing shelter for wildlife is very important in winter. Bug hotels are a great school project to help out our little creatures. If you have little hiding space in your garden at home, why not create a pile of sticks that you leave untouched for the winter? Ireland's wildlife will thank you. And that is the story of Irish wildlife. Thanks for watching.
And that was the story of Irish wildlife. So just at the end there, what I had mentioned, creating a pile of sticks in your garden at home. So that'll just create some shelter for wildlife. So perhaps for some little insects, some maybe even some small little rodents if they want to overwinter. If you put them into a safe place at the back of your garden where you're just keeping it out of the way and providing habitat for them, that'll keep them nice and cozy and safe during the winter. But that's just an option in case you don't have much hiding space in your garden at home. Now, so the last thing that we have to, or the second last thing that we've got to do is our craft activity. So this week's craft activity is going to be making bird feeders. So again, I'm going to play the video like I've done before, and that just makes it easier because you can see my hands. So I can share that now. And if you're working along with me, all you need is the few ingredients that I had mentioned to your teachers. So your lard, so to make sure that it's unsalted. We can't be giving birds salty lard because it'll be too much for their systems because they're so small. So unsalted lard, sunflower seeds, and some oats. And we can use that to make our bird cakes. So I'm just going to share the video now and we will get started with our bird cakes.
Let's make bird cakes. This is 2 tablespoons of lard. Lard is full of fat that can provide birds with the energy they need during the winter. Use the back of your spoon to mash the lard. This will help you to mix well when you add the other ingredients. Next, add 1 tablespoon of sunflower seeds. Mix this well with the lard. Next, add 1 tablespoon of oats. Make sure that there are no seeds or oats left behind. When everything is combined, mold the bird cake in your hands to create a ball. Use your fingers and the palm of your hands to shape it. Add your 2nd tablespoon of seeds to the bowl and roll your bird cake in them. In the cold weather, the lard will harden. This is important because soft, greasy fats can damage bird feathers. This cake should attract birds such as blue tits, great tits, and house sparrows. Make sure to put it into a feeder or leave it in a container on a windowsill.
Now, so that is just a very simple recipe for bird cakes. Excuse me. If you worked along with me there, it might have been a little bit fast, but all you have to do is just mash up your lard, make sure it's nice and soft, add in your sunflower seeds and your oats, and then you have yourself a nice fat cake for your birds to consume. So the energy that they need in the winter, they need a lot of saturated fat, which is contained in the lard. And that is very important for them in the winter because when they consume food, just like us, that allows them to have energy. And energy is, of course, very important so we can do all of the things that we need to do. So birds need a lot of energy in the wintertime and they need lots of saturated fats because they're so tiny and they fly around. So they need a lot of energy. And a very good way to do that is to give them lard. So our final thing that we need to do is our quiz challenger question. So if you were working along with me with the activity, you might just need to listen up for a second so we can reveal number 5 quiz challenger question. So as usual, I'm going to read it once and then I will read it a second time. So quiz challenger number 5. Before the plough was introduced, which tiny creature ploughed the land? And one more time. Before the plough was introduced, which tiny creature ploughed the land? So remember, this is our quiz challenger question. So these answers, they don't need to be submitted until the 10th of December. And on the 10th of December, I will be sending out an email to all of your teachers with instructions on how to enter the competition. So that is everything that I've got to show you today. Thanks for sticking with me to learn all about the environment. It was very brief, and I hope we were able to cover the basics for everybody out there. So have an excellent weekend, and I'll see you next Friday for horses. So horses is going to be a brand new lesson plan that we're going to be going through next week. So thanks very much, and I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.